My name is Bianca, and I am 24 years old. I grew up believing that family meant safety, that the people who gave you life would never be the ones to steal your future. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the deepest wounds come from the hands that were supposed to hold you. I never imagined my own parents would rob me of everything I had worked for, and I never thought my 78-year-old grandmother would become the warrior who fought for my justice. Before I share this story with you, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If stories about standing up for yourself speak to your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now, let me tell you about the Sunday morning when my grandmother made sure the whole town knew exactly what my parents had done to me. I came into this world in a small Ohio town where everybody knew everybody, and secrets had a way of slipping through screen doors on summer evenings. Our house sat on Maple Street, a two-story colonial with white shutters and a porch swing that my father installed the year I was born. From the outside looking in, we were the picture of an American family. My father, Gary, ran a small contracting business. My mother, Linda, volunteered at church fundraisers and baked casseroles for sick neighbors. Every Sunday, we occupied the third pew at Grace Community Church, smiling and shaking hands like we had stepped out of a greeting card. But appearances can be deceiving. I learned that lesson before I was old enough to understand what it meant. As the firstborn child, I carried expectations on my shoulders from the moment I could walk. I was supposed to set an example to make my parents proud, to prove that they had done something right. So I became the girl who never caused trouble. I earned straight A grades and displayed them on the refrigerator. I cleaned my room without being reminded and helped my mother fold laundry on Saturday mornings. I practiced piano until my fingers ached because my mother said it would look good on college applications. Everything I did was calculated to earn the approval I craved. Then my brother Derek arrived when I was 3 years old. He had chubby cheeks and curious brown eyes, and the entire household seemed to reorganize itself around his existence. Suddenly, my piano recitals were rescheduled because Derek had a cold. My birthday parties became smaller because Derek needed new equipment for whatever sport he had decided to try that month. The refrigerator that once displayed my report cards now showcased his finger paintings and participation trophies. I told myself this was normal. Younger children always demanded more attention. My time would come. I just had to keep working hard, and eventually my parents would notice. The signs of favoritism grew more obvious as we got older. Derek received a brand new bicycle for his 10th birthday, while I inherited my cousin's hand-me-down at the same age. When Derek struggled in school, my parents hired expensive tutors. When I needed help with calculus, they told me to figure it out myself because I was smart enough. Derek's baseball games became family events with cheering and celebratory dinners afterward. My academic decathlon competitions happened without a single family member in the audience. I swallowed my hurt and convinced myself I was being oversensitive. Parents love their children equally. They just expressed it differently. That was what I told myself every night before I fell asleep. The one person who made me feel truly seen was my grandmother Eleanor. She was my mother's mother, a woman who had been widowed at 35 and refused to let tragedy define her. Instead of remarrying or moving in with relatives, she took over a failing bakery on Main Street and transformed it into the most beloved establishment in 3 counties. Eleanor's sweet spot became famous for wedding cakes that tasted like heaven and cinnamon rolls that people drove 50 miles to buy. My grandmother built that business with her own 2 hands, working double shifts and sacrificing vacations and driving a rusted station wagon so she could invest every spare penny back into her dream. When I was born, Grandma Eleanor did something extraordinary. She walked into First National Bank and opened a college savings account with my name on it. That very first deposit was $500 money she had earned baking 300 cupcakes for a corporate event the week before. From that day forward, she contributed to that account religiously. Sometimes it was $50 when business was slow. Sometimes it was $1,000 after a particularly profitable holiday season. She convinced my parents to add money too, though I later discovered their contributions were sporadic and minimal. Over 18 years, that account grew into something remarkable. The deposits accumulated, the interest compounded. By the time I graduated high school, the balance had reached $287,000. It was enough to pay for medical school. It was enough to change the entire trajectory of my life. On my 18th birthday, Grandma Eleanor invited me to her little house on the edge of town. She sat me down at her kitchen table, the same table where she had taught me to roll pie crust and frost cupcakes, and she told me about the account. When she said the number out loud, I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to repeat it. She did, and then she took my hands in hers and looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She said, "Bianca, this money represents 18 years of my life. I saved it because I believe in you. I saved it because you deserve opportunities I never had. Promise me you will use it wisely. Promise me you will build a future that makes you proud." I promised her with tears streaming down my face. I hugged her so tightly that she laughed and pretended to gasp for air. In that moment, I felt something I had rarely experienced in my own home. I felt valued. I felt worthy. I felt loved without conditions. When my acceptance letter arrived from the university I had dreamed about since freshman year, I thought my life was finally beginning. The pre-med program was rigorous and competitive, but I was ready. I had spent 18 years preparing for this. I had the grades, the determination, and now I had the financial security to focus entirely on my studies. For the first time in my life, I felt like the main character of my own story instead of a background extra in my brother's. That summer before college was supposed to be magical. I spent hours researching my professors and planning my course schedule. I bought new notebooks and highlighters in every color. I imagined myself walking across campus free from the weight of always trying to prove myself to people who refused to see my worth. I thought I was stepping into my future. I had no idea I was actually stepping into a nightmare that would test everything I believed about family loyalty and the courage it takes to speak the truth. The trouble began 14 days before my scheduled departure for college. I needed to access the savings account to pay my first semester tuition and fees. The university had sent multiple reminders about payment deadlines, and I wanted to handle everything early. I had always been meticulous about responsibilities, always the girl who turned in assignments before they were due and arrived at appointments 15 minutes ahead of schedule. I called my mother on a Tuesday afternoon to ask about the account details. I explained that I needed the routing number and account information to complete the online payment portal. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer than it should have. When my mother finally spoke, her voice had a strange quality to it, higher than usual, tighter, like she was reading from a script she had not rehearsed enough. She said I should not worry about those details. She said my father would handle everything. She told me to focus on packing and leave the financial matters to the adults. Something about her response made my stomach clench. I was 18 years old, legally an adult about to start college. Why would my parents treat me like a child, incapable of managing my own tuition payment? I pressed the issue, explaining that I wanted to learn how to handle these things myself. I was going to be a college student after all. I needed to start taking responsibility for my own life. My mother made an excuse about having something boiling on the stove and said she would call me back later. She never did. The next morning, I decided to contact the bank directly. I still had the notebook Grandma Eleanor had given me years ago, the one where she had written down the account number and encouraged me to keep track of the balance. I found a quiet corner in my bedroom and dialed the customer service number. The verification process took several minutes. I answered security questions about my address and social security number and the year I was born. Finally, the representative pulled up my account information. What she said next changed everything. She told me the account had been closed approximately 6 months earlier. She told me the full balance had been withdrawn by the cosigner on the account. She told me there was nothing remaining. I asked her to repeat herself. She did. Her voice was apologetic, like she understood that she was delivering terrible news, but could not do anything to change it. I demanded she check again. There had to be a mistake. There had to be a system error or a mixed up account number or something that would explain how $287,000 had simply vanished. But she checked again and again, and the answer remained the same. The account was empty. The money was gone. I drove to my parents' house with my hands trembling on the steering wheel and my mind spinning through every possible explanation. Maybe there had been a medical emergency I did not know about. Maybe they had transferred the money to a higher interest account for security purposes. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding that would be resolved with a simple conversation. When I walked through the front door, I found my parents sitting in the living room. My father was pretending to watch a baseball game on television, but his eyes were not tracking the movement on the screen. My mother was holding a magazine in her lap, but she had not turned a page in the entire time I stood watching from the doorway. They both looked up when I entered, and in that moment, before anyone said a single word, I saw the truth written on their faces: the guilt, the fear, the desperate hope that somehow I had not discovered what they had done. I told them I had called the bank. I told them the account was empty. I asked them to explain what had happened to my college fund. My mother set down her magazine with deliberate slowness. My father finally turned off the television. The house became silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting the seconds until my world finished falling apart. My mother started talking about difficult circumstances and unexpected challenges. She used phrases like temporary adjustment and family emergency. She spoke in circles, words tumbling over each other, never quite landing on the truth. I interrupted her. I asked point blank where the money was. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Finally, my father spoke for the first time. He said they had needed to help Derek. He said Derek had gotten into some trouble. He said they had always planned to replace the money eventually. Eventually. As if $287,000 could simply reappear through wishful thinking. The full story emerged in painful pieces over the next hour. Derek had developed a gambling addiction that started with casual sports betting and escalated into something far more destructive. He moved from online poker to cryptocurrency speculation, chasing losses with bigger and bigger bets, convinced that the next wager would be the one to turn everything around. He lost every dollar he had. Then he borrowed money from people who did not offer friendly repayment terms. When those debts came due and Derek could not pay, he came crying to our parents. And instead of letting him face the consequences of his own choices, they decided to fix everything for him. They raided my college fund. They took every penny that Grandma Eleanor had spent 18 years saving. They handed it to Derek, and he gambled most of it away within weeks. $287,000. Gone. Vanished into online casinos and bad cryptocurrency investments, and the desperate delusion that luck would eventually favor someone who had never learned to face reality. I stood in my parents' living room looking at the two people who had raised me, and I felt something inside me break. They had stolen my future. They had chosen my brother over me. They had watched me plan and dream and prepare for college, knowing the entire time that they had already destroyed everything I was working toward. I asked them one final question. I asked if Grandma Eleanor knew. The terror that flooded my mother's face told me everything I needed to know. The days following that revelation were the darkest of my life. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I wandered through my apartment like a ghost, picking up objects and setting them down without any memory of what I had been doing. The future I had envisioned so clearly had evaporated, and I could not figure out how to keep moving when the ground beneath me had disappeared. I returned to my parents' house 3 days later, hoping that somehow the situation would look different with time. Maybe they had found a solution. Maybe Derek had won some money back. Maybe there was an angle I had not considered. Instead, I received a lecture that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my own family. My mother sat across from me at the kitchen table and explained her reasoning with the calm confidence of someone who genuinely believed what she was saying. She told me that Derek's situation was different because he was a boy. She said his reputation in the community mattered in ways that mine did not. She explained that if people found out about his gambling debts, it would follow him forever, damaging his career prospects and his standing among his peers. Then she said the words that still echo in my mind years later. She told me that I was a girl. She said girls get married. She said eventually some man would come along and take care of me, so I did not need that college fund the way Derek needed it. She told me I should be grateful for everything the family had given me over the years, instead of making trouble over money that was going to be spent on me anyway. I stared at her across that table at this woman who had raised me, and I realized I did not know her at all. In her mind, my education was a luxury. My dreams were expendable. My entire future was worth less than protecting my brother from the consequences of his own poor decisions. I left the kitchen and found my father in the garage, pretending to organize tools that were already perfectly arranged. I asked him to talk to me. I asked him to tell me that he saw how wrong this was. My father has always been a quiet man, someone who prefers to let my mother handle difficult conversations while he fades into the background. But I had always believed that somewhere beneath his silence lived a sense of fairness, a moral compass that would eventually point toward justice. I was wrong about that too. He told me that what was done was done. He said dwelling on it would not bring the money back. He acknowledged that the situation was not ideal, but he insisted that I was strong enough to figure something out. Then he asked me for a favor. He asked me not to tell Grandma Eleanor. He said she was getting older. He said news like this could affect her health. He said the stress of knowing what had happened might be too much for her heart to handle. He dressed up his request in concern for her well-being. But I heard what he was really saying. He was afraid. He was afraid of what his mother-in-law would do when she discovered the truth. He was afraid of the consequences that would follow. He wanted me to protect them. They had stolen from me, and now they wanted me to keep their secret, so they would not have to face what they had done. I sought out Derek last. I found him in his childhood bedroom at our parents' house, sprawled across the bed playing video games, as if nothing in the world was wrong. He barely glanced up when I walked in. The controller kept clicking. The screen kept flashing. He could not even pause his game to look his sister in the eye. I told him I knew about the money. I told him I knew he had gambled away my entire college fund. I waited for remorse. I waited for an apology. I waited for some sign that he understood the magnitude of what he had taken from me. Derek shrugged. He actually shrugged like I had accused him of eating the last slice of pizza instead of destroying my future. He said it was not like I could not earn more money. He said I was smart and would figure something out. He reminded me that he had been in genuine danger from the people he owed, as if that justified everything. Then he said something that revealed exactly who he had become. He said he never asked our parents to take my money. He said that was their decision, not his. If I wanted to be angry at someone, I should be angry at them. But I saw through his deflection. Derek had spent his entire life being rescued from his own mistakes. He had learned that no matter how badly he messed up, someone would always appear to fix everything. He felt no guilt because he had never been required to feel guilt. He was the golden child, eternally protected, forever excused. I walked out of his room without saying another word. There was nothing left to say. That night I called Marcus. We had been friends since 7th grade when he moved to our town from Cleveland and sat next to me in history class. He was the one person who had always seen me clearly, who had always listened without judgment, who had always told me the truth even when it was hard to hear. When I told him everything that had happened, he did not interrupt. He let me pour out the whole ugly story, and when I finished, he said something I desperately needed to hear. He said this was not my fault. He said I had done nothing wrong. He said the people who were supposed to protect me had failed, and that failure belonged entirely to them. Then he told me I needed to stop keeping their secret. He said Grandma Eleanor deserved to know what had happened to the money she had sacrificed 18 years to save. He said the truth was the only path forward. But I was terrified. I was terrified of what telling the truth would do to my family. I was terrified of being blamed for the explosion that would follow. I was terrified that somehow, as always, I would end up being cast as the villain for refusing to quietly accept my own destruction. For weeks, I existed in a paralyzed state. I stopped packing for college. I stopped responding to excited messages from my future roommate. I lay in bed at night staring at the ceiling, trapped between the unbearable present and an impossible future. My parents kept reaching out. They invited me to Sunday dinners. They sent messages through relatives asking why I had become so distant. They wanted everything to go back to normal. They wanted me to swallow my pain and pretend that nothing had changed. I could not pretend, but I could not figure out how to move forward either. And then Grandma Eleanor called and everything changed. I was not planning to tell her anything. When I saw her name flash across my phone screen on that gray Thursday afternoon, my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. I knew I could not keep my voice steady. I knew she would hear the cracks in my composure and start asking questions I was not ready to answer. But I answered anyway. Some part of me was desperate to hear her voice, to feel connected to the one person who had always believed in me without reservation. She sounded cheerful when she greeted me. She asked about my preparations for college. She wanted to know if I had bought new bedding for my dormitory. She asked whether I was nervous or excited or some combination of both. Her voice was warm with anticipation for the future she had worked so hard to give me. Something inside me shattered. I started crying before I could stop myself, and once the tears began, they would not stop. I sobbed into the phone, while my grandmother's voice shifted from confusion to alarm. She demanded to know what was wrong. I tried to tell her I was fine, just stressed about leaving home. But Grandma Eleanor had not spent 78 years on this earth without learning to recognize a lie. She said she was coming over. She told me not to move. She hung up before I could argue. 2 hours later, she was sitting in my small apartment holding my hands in hers, just like she had on my 18th birthday. Her eyes searched my face, cataloging the dark circles and the tear stains, and the hollow expression of someone whose foundation had crumbled. She told me to tell her everything. She said whatever it was, we would face it together. So I told her. The words poured out in a flood I could not control. I told her about the empty account, and Derek's gambling debts, and the $287,000 that had vanished. I told her what my mother had said about boys and girls, and how my future mattered less, because someday I would find a husband to take care of me. I told her how my father had asked me to keep quiet, to protect the family reputation. I told her everything while she sat perfectly still, her grip on my hands tightening with each new revelation. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. My grandmother did not move. She did not speak. She sat there processing what she had heard, and I watched her face transform. The warmth drained away. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went cold and hard like winter ice forming over a pond. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of hard work and sacrifice. She said 78 years. She said that in 78 years of living, this was the first time she had ever felt ashamed of her own daughter. She released my hands and stood up slowly, using the arm of the chair for balance. She walked to the window and stared out at the street below. And when she spoke again, her voice was steadier, but no less fierce. She told me about the double shifts she had worked at the bakery. She told me about the vacations she had skipped, and the car repairs she had postponed, and the luxury she had denied herself, so that she could put money into my account every single month. She said she had done all of it because she believed in me. She had done it because she wanted to give me opportunities she had never had. Then she turned to face me, and her expression held something I had rarely seen in my grandmother: fury. She said this was not going to be swept under the rug. She said she was going to talk to my mother and father. She said they were going to face what they had done. I tried to stop her. I said it would not change anything. I said the money was already gone, and confrontation would only make things worse. But Grandma Eleanor was not listening. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said was going to change it. That evening, she drove to my parents' house. I was not there to witness the confrontation, but I heard about it from neighbors who reported Ray's voices carrying through the walls. My father apparently left the house at one point driving away in his truck, only to return an hour later with his tail between his legs. When Grandma Eleanor called me late that night, her voice was calm but resolute. She told me she had given my parents an ultimatum. They had 30 days to come up with a plan to return the money they had stolen. She did not expect them to produce the full amount, but they needed to demonstrate accountability. They needed to show some willingness to make things right. I asked her what would happen if they did not. She said if they refused to take responsibility, she would make sure everyone knew exactly who they were. She would tell the truth publicly and let them deal with the consequences of their own actions. I hung up the phone feeling two conflicting emotions: fear of what was coming, and a tiny flame of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally going to fight for me. The morning of the Sunday service arrived with September sunshine streaming through my bedroom curtains. I had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning as my mind played through every possible scenario of what might happen in the hours ahead. The 30 days had passed. My parents had done nothing. My mother had called Grandma Eleanor once, crying and pleading, but she had refused to discuss any concrete plan for making restitution. My father had sent a single text message saying he was working on something, but nothing had materialized. They were hoping the problem would simply go away. They were betting that Grandma Eleanor would not follow through on her threat. They had underestimated her badly. She arrived at my apartment at exactly 9:30, driving the same practical sedan she had owned for 15 years. She wore her navy blue dress with the pearl buttons, the one she reserved for important occasions. Her white hair was pinned up neatly, and her posture was ramrod straight. She looked like a general preparing to lead troops into battle. I asked her one final time if she was certain about this. She looked at me with those sharp blue eyes and said she had never been more certain of anything in her entire life. We drove to Grace Community Church together. The parking lot was already filling up when we arrived, families climbing out of minivans and sedans, children in their Sunday clothes chasing each other across the lawn. It looked like any other Sunday morning. Peaceful, ordinary. No one had any idea what was about to unfold. My parents were already inside when we entered. I spotted them in their usual pew, my mother's smile fixed firmly in place, my father nodding at passing congregants. Derek was conspicuously absent. I wondered if he had any warning about what was coming, or if my parents had decided it was safer to keep him away. The service began normally. We sang hymns from the worn hymnals. We bowed our heads for prayers. Pastor Thomas delivered a sermon about living with integrity and honoring our commitments, which in hindsight felt almost prophetic, as if some higher power was setting the stage for what would follow. Then came the community sharing portion of the service. This was a time when members were invited to stand and share prayers or praises or announcements with the congregation. Usually people talked about sick relatives or new grandchildren or upcoming fundraisers. Today would be different. I watched my grandmother rise from her seat. The movement was slow and deliberate, the motion of someone who understood the gravity of what she was about to do. Every head in the sanctuary turned to watch Eleanor Mitchell, one of the most respected members of Grace Community Church, make her way toward the front of the room. Pastor Thomas smiled and gestured for her to proceed. He trusted her. Everyone trusted her. She had spent 50 years building a reputation as an honest, hardworking pillar of this community. Grandma Eleanor gripped the edges of the wooden podium and let her gaze sweep across the congregation. She looked at the faces of people she had known for decades, the people who had bought her wedding cakes and celebrated birthdays with her cinnamon rolls, and trusted her with the most important moments of their lives. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. She introduced herself, though everyone already knew who she was. She mentioned her bakery and her 50 years of membership in this church. She talked about trying to live with honesty and integrity, about believing that the truth mattered even when it was difficult. Then she told them about the college fund. She explained how she had opened the account 18 years ago, when her granddaughter Bianca was born. She described the monthly deposits, the sacrifices, the years of careful saving that had grown into $287,000. She painted a picture of hope and hard work, and a grandmother's love for a child she believed would do remarkable things. The congregation listened in rapt attention. I saw people nodding, recognizing the values she described. Some older women dabbed at their eyes, moved by her dedication. Then her voice changed. It grew harder, colder, weighted with grief and anger. She told them that last month her granddaughter had discovered the account was empty. She told them that every penny had been taken by people who were not strangers or criminals, but family members sitting in this very room. Gasps rippled through the sanctuary. Heads began to turn, searching for the people she was about to name. She told them that her daughter Linda and her son-in-law Gary had emptied the account. She told them the money had been given to their son Derek to pay gambling debts. She told them they had chosen to sacrifice their daughter's future to protect their son's reputation. The whispers grew louder. I felt eyes on me, on my parents, darting back and forth as people processed what they were hearing. Grandma Eleanor was not finished. She told the congregation that when Bianca confronted her parents, they had told her to stay silent. They had told her that her future mattered less because she was a girl. They had asked her to protect the very people who had stolen from her. She paused and let her words settle over the room like a heavy blanket. She said she was not there to ask for pity or sympathy. She was there because the truth deserved to be told. She was there because silence protected wrongdoers instead of victims. She was there because her granddaughter deserved to know that someone would always stand up for her, even when her own parents would not. Then she turned and looked directly at my mother. Her voice was steady but devastating. She said she had raised her daughter better than this. She said she was heartbroken that her own child had not lived up to the values she had tried to teach, but she would not let her heartbreak prevent her from doing what was right. She stepped back from the podium. The sanctuary was utterly silent. I do not know what made me stand up in that moment. Maybe it was the courage I had just witnessed. Maybe it was years of staying small and quiet, finally reaching their limit. Before I fully understood what I was doing, I was on my feet and asking Pastor Thomas if I could say a few words. He nodded, still looking shell-shocked. I walked to the front of the church on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I stood at the podium where my grandmother had stood and looked out at the community that had watched me grow up. I thanked my grandmother for loving me enough to fight for me. I said I was not there because I wanted revenge or sympathy. I was there because I refused to be ashamed anymore. I refused to pretend that what had been done to me was acceptable. I told them I was going to find a way to go to college. I told them I was going to build my own future without relying on people who had proven they could not be trusted. I told them I was going to succeed, not because of my parents, but in spite of them. When I finished speaking, the congregation applauded. It started with a few people and spread through the room a wave of support from people who had known me my whole life and wanted me to know they believed in me. I walked back to my seat and felt my grandmother take my hand. She squeezed it tight, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I was not alone. My parents left the church immediately after the service ended. They practically ran to their car, unable to face the stares and whispers that followed them. The congregation parted to let them through, but I saw the expressions on people's faces, the disappointment, the disgust, the loss of respect that could never be recovered. The whole town knew now, and nothing would ever be the same. In the weeks following that Sunday morning, the consequences of the truth rippled through my family, like waves from a stone dropped into still water. News traveled fast in our small community. By Monday afternoon, everyone had heard what happened at church. The story spread from conversations in the grocery store checkout line to whispered discussions at the post office to dining room tables in homes throughout the county. My mother's name became synonymous with betrayal. My father's business suffered as clients suddenly remembered other contractors they had been meaning to call. My mother stopped leaving the house. She could not face the judgment in the eyes of people who had once respected her. The invitations to church committees and community events stopped arriving. The phone that used to ring constantly went silent. My father lost 3 major contracts in a single week. People who had hired him for years suddenly found reasons to take their business elsewhere. His reputation as a trustworthy contractor had been built over decades. It collapsed in days. Derek finally had to face reality without a safety net. Without access to family money, he could not pay the remaining debts he owed. I heard through relatives that he sold his car and took a warehouse job working night shifts. He moved into a cheap apartment across town and started the slow process of digging himself out of the hole he had created. It was not enough to fix everything, but it was more than he had ever done for himself before. As for me, I refused to let this tragedy be the end of my story. I spent long hours researching every possible avenue for funding my education. I wrote scholarship applications until my fingers cramped. I reached out to financial aid offices at universities across the state, explaining my circumstances with brutal honesty. I applied for emergency grants from foundations that supported students facing unexpected hardships. The responses started arriving after a few weeks. A foundation that helped first-generation college students offered me a partial scholarship. My dream university worked with me to create a modified financial aid package. I qualified for federal student loans that would cover most of what remained. I also started working. I took a job waiting tables at a diner downtown, arriving at 5:30 every morning to open the breakfast shift. In the afternoons, I tutored high school students struggling with math and science. At night, I did freelance data entry work online, typing until my eyes blurred and my back ached. It was exhausting. There were moments when I wanted to collapse and give up. But every paycheck brought me closer to my goal, and every small victory reminded me that I was capable of saving myself. Then something unexpected happened. My Aunt Marlene called. She was my mother's older sister, someone I had seen only at occasional holiday gatherings. She and my mother had never been particularly close, and I barely knew her beyond polite small talk at family events. But Marlene had heard everything, and she was horrified by what her sister had done. She told me she was sorry. She said she had no idea her sister was capable of such betrayal. She said she wanted to help in whatever way she could. Marlene offered to let me stay at her house while I attended college. She lived about 45 minutes from campus, which meant a commute, but it also meant I would not have to worry about paying for room and board. She said the drive would be worth it if it meant helping me succeed. I hesitated at first. I did not want to be a burden on anyone else. I did not want to owe anyone anything. But Marlene insisted. She said family was supposed to take care of each other, and if her sister had forgotten that, she had not. Marcus also stepped up in ways I never anticipated. Through his uncle who worked at a local hospital, he helped me get an interview for a part-time position in the administrative office. The job did not pay much, but it gave me experience in a medical setting that would be invaluable for my future career. Grandma Eleanor transferred what remained of her personal savings into a new account with only my name on it. It was not $287,000. It was not even close. But it was something. It was a foundation I could build upon. The hardest decision came several weeks after the Sunday service. After many sleepless nights, I sat down and wrote a letter to my parents. I did not write it in anger, though anger would have been justified. I did not write it to wound them, though they had wounded me deeply. I wrote it because I needed to establish clear boundaries for my own protection. I told them I was cutting off contact. I explained that I did not hate them, but I could no longer trust them. I said I could not continue being part of a family that measured my worth by my willingness to sacrifice for others. I told them that perhaps someday things would be different, but for now, I needed to walk away. I mailed the letter and did not look back. The day I finally left for college, I drove past Grace Community Church one last time. The building looked the same as it always had, white steeple reaching toward the sky oak doors standing open in welcome. But I was not the same girl who had sat in those pews, pretending everything was fine. I was someone new, someone who had learned that speaking the truth, no matter how frightening, was always better than drowning in silence. I pulled onto the highway and watched my hometown shrink in the rearview mirror. Somewhere ahead, my future was waiting. It would not be the future I had originally planned, but it would be mine. Completely mine. And that was worth more than any amount of money. 2 years have passed since the Sunday morning when my grandmother stood in front of her community and told the truth. 2 years since I walked away from my parents and started building a life on my own terms. So much has changed that sometimes the girl I used to be feels like a stranger. The first few months at college were brutal. I worked constantly, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. There were nights when I cried into my pillow, overwhelmed by exhaustion and grief for the family I had lost. There were moments when doubt whispered that I was not strong enough, that eventually the weight of everything would crush me. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. I made friends who became chosen family. My professors recognized my work ethic and advocated for me in ways my own parents never had. I discovered reserves of strength I did not know I possessed. The girl who had spent her childhood trying to earn love learned that she was worthy of love simply because she existed. My grandmother remained my anchor through all of it. We talked every Sunday evening, and she never missed a chance to tell me how proud she was. When I made the dean's list for the first time, she sent flowers and a card that said she always knew I would shine. When I called her crying because organic chemistry was destroying my soul, she told me stories about the years when her bakery was failing and everyone told her to quit. I also built a real relationship with Aunt Marlene. Living in her house gave me the chance to know her as more than a distant relative I saw at Thanksgiving. She was funny and kind and fiercely independent, and I came to love her like a second mother. About a year after I left home, word reached me through the family network that my mother had gotten sick. It was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough to require hospitalization and extended recovery. For weeks, I wrestled with whether or not to visit her. In the end, I decided to go. Not because I had forgiven her, and not because I wanted to reconcile. I went because I needed to close that chapter for myself. I needed to look at her and know that I was no longer afraid of her disapproval, no longer desperate for her love, no longer the little girl begging to be seen. The hospital room was small and painted pale green. My mother looked older than I remembered, diminished somehow, like the consequences of her choices had physically reduced her. My father sat in a plastic chair in the corner, but he did not stand when I walked in. My mother said my name like it was a question. She said she was surprised I came. I told her I came. I did not say anything else. We did not have a dramatic reconciliation. There were no tears of forgiveness or promises to start over. We made awkward small talk about the weather and the hospital food, and nothing that actually mattered. After about an hour, I stood up and told her I hoped she recovered quickly. As I walked out of that room, I realized something important. I did not need her apology to move forward. I did not need her to acknowledge what she had done, or admit that she was wrong. The only thing I needed was to release my own anger, to stop carrying the weight of waiting for justice that might never come. She was not a monster. She was just a flawed person who had made terrible choices. Seeing her small and sick in that hospital bed helped me understand that I could feel sadness for what she had become, without feeling obligated to let her back into my life. I walked out of the hospital and never looked back. Today, I am completing my degree and preparing for the next stage of my journey. I still work hard. I still push myself every single day. But now I do it out of love for my own future rather than desperation to prove my worth to people who refuse to see it. I have real friendships built on mutual respect. I have a grandmother who would move mountains for me. I have an aunt who opened her home when I needed sanctuary. I have learned that family is not always about blood. Sometimes family is about choice. The $287,000 my parents stole is still gone. I will spend years paying off student loans. Some nights when I am exhausted from work and studying, I think about how different things could have been. But then I remember what I gained. I learned that my worth is not determined by how much I sacrifice for others. I learned that the people who truly love you never ask you to make yourself smaller for their comfort. I learned that speaking the truth out loud, even when your voice shakes, is always better than protecting people who have hurt you. My grandmother taught me those lessons on a Sunday morning when she refused to let injustice hide in the shadows. I carry her courage with me every single day. If you are watching this and you have been betrayed by someone you trusted, please know that you are not alone. The pain is real. The grief is valid. But the pain does not last forever. The people who hurt you do not get to write the ending of your story. Your future is still yours, no matter how much someone tries to take from it. I am living proof of that truth. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up against someone you love to protect yourself? How did you find the courage to speak your truth? Please share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear your words today. If this video touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it